Good afternoon, everybody. Pranam Dar. We're just a couple of minutes before 1 o'clock. I'm hoping that people are managing to get into the call to join us for what is our last session, Leadership and Lunch from the Royal College of Nursing in Wales. So I'm just going to make a few introductory remarks and then hand over to the RCN Wales Board Chair. It's my absolute pleasure to be here this afternoon. My name's Helen Wiley and I'm the Director of the Royal College in Wales. This is our final session in Leadership Lunch and Learn series of events in 2022, and I'd just like to put on record my big thank you to the team who have made these as vibrant and interesting as they have been, and I'm sure today's is going to be the same. This year's theme has focused on resilience and well-being, and the events have given us an opportunity to listen, learn, challenge and question with one another. And today I'm going to be able to introduce to you a panel who are going to share their views on clinical supervision and how it can empower the workforce. So lots of big thank yous and big welcomes, croesios, to our panel. And on the panel today we have Sue Tranka, Chief Nursing Officer for Wales, and Michelle Moseley, Professional Lead Clinical Supervision, to share the vision of clinical supervision. Alongside them then we have Emilia Lyons and McLoughlin, both from Aneurin Bevan University Health Board, who are experienced practitioners of clinical supervision. But before we open up our event further, I'd like to hand over to Richard Jones, the Royal College of Nursing in Wales Board Chair. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Helen. Pranam Dar and good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to once again join you, this time for the final session in the Leadership Lunch and Learn 2022 series. It is my pleasure to tell you a little bit more about each of our panelists, and I'm very proud to introduce them. Firstly, Sue Tranka was appointed as our Chief Nursing Officer for Wales and Nurse Director of NHS Wales in the summer of 2021. Sue was formerly the Deputy Chief Nursing Officer for Patient Safety and Innovation at NHS England and Improvement. She has had 29 years of varied experience in nursing and has spent the last 22 years working in the NHS. She trained as a midwife, registered general nurse, mental health nurse, and community nurse, and her career spanned both operational and clinical leadership roles. In October 2020, Sue was listed among the Health Service Journal's 50 most influential people in health from a Black, Asian and minority ethnic background. And in December 2021, she was awarded the Fellowship of the Queen's Nursing Institute. Our second panelist is our own Michelle Moseley, who is currently seconded to the Office of the Chief Nurse, researching, very importantly, a Wales model of clinical supervision. Michelle was nominated for the RCN Wales Nurse of the Year Award in 2018 for her work in safeguarding children and young people, and indeed went on to win this category award. Michelle is a Senior Fellow of the Higher Education Academy, an external examiner for the University of Surrey, and professional editor of the Community Practitioner Journal. If that's not enough, Michelle commenced her PhD in September 2018 on a part-time basis and is exploring how supportive safeguarding supervision is for health visitors. Our third panelist is Emilia Lyons, who works as a clinical supervisor trainer in Aneurin Bevan University Health Board. The role was specifically developed to grow clinical supervision within the Health Board. Amelia is a mental health nurse, a group analyst, and a counsellor, trainer, and an accredited Balint group leader. Amelia worked in higher education for 2 decades before entering nursing and mental health. Already a trained psychotherapist, she wanted to work in severe mental health and has now spent years working on an adult forensic rehabilitation ward. And she has undertaken additional training as a group analyst, running a therapy group for patients in secondary care. And our final panelist is Mclaughlin, who is a registered midwife, again in the Nairon Bevan University Health Board, where she is a clinical supervisor for midwives. She is currently in a seconded role as the lead midwife for clinical governance and for risk management. She's currently working towards a Master in Science degree in professional practice, having recently completed a module in leadership and quality improvement. She is deeply passionate about supporting individuals to foster empowerment and resilience, as well as promoting actions to maintain well-being. Wow, what a lineup on this panel. So, over to you and Michelle to start our final lunch and learn session.
Thank you, Richard. Prananda. Good afternoon, and thank you very much to the RCN for inviting me to this final session in a series of leadership events, which I know you have delivered throughout May. It really has been an example of excellence in nursing, where compassionate leadership and expertise have been demonstrated with the wide range of speakers that you have had and that are also being hosted today. So I personally value this opportunity to have this moment to share part of my vision with you, and an area that is included within the Cno Priorities around career spanning support for nursing in Wales. This very much links closely with today's topic, clinical supervision, but also how this aligns with preceptorship. As we continue to deal with the ongoing impact of the pandemic for our health and care workforce across the system, I truly do believe that the system deserves a supportive infrastructure to enhance not only your well-being, but the well-being of all those that our workforce care for. As you may already be aware, my Cno priorities, which were launched in April, cover 5 overarching themes. 1, leading the professions, workforce, making the professions attractive, improving health and social care outcomes, and professional equity and healthcare equality. We will be working with the NHS and key partners to implement these priorities over the next 2 years to improve the quality and safety of patient care, as well as improving outcomes for patients and families across Wales. But absolutely importantly, ensuring that our workforce are well and truly cared for. There will be some important enablers required to achieve the improvements we need to see, from digital technology, improved data quality, which will absolutely be at the forefront, but shared governance to help drive better engagement, as well as professional influence and collaboration. We will absolutely ensure we have external partnership working both nationally and internationally. And that is more important now than ever, as we learn from what the pandemic has taught us, but importantly, how we need stronger alignment with policy and strategy within Welsh Government and that translation into the NHS. This event today provides me with the perfect opportunity to share with you the work we are doing in Welsh Government to develop a nationally consistent direction and policy position around professional career spanning support for staff. This will take the format of a preceptorship programme for newly registered nurses through their transition phase from student to confident and competent registrant. Complementing that work, and work that is already underway to develop a framework for clinical supervision to continue supporting nursing teams throughout their careers. These areas of work are being led by 2 secondees working in my team for the next 12 months and both have senior academic backgrounds. Ruth Wynne-Williams, which some of you may know from Bangor University, is working to inform a policy position around preceptorship delivery throughout Wales, and Michelle Moseley, who I will introduce in a moment, who is here with me today from the RCN Wales and is leading the clinical supervision arm of the project within my office. Both Ruth and Michelle are supported by Gillian Knight, who again many of you may know, and is one of my nursing officers, and she leads on workforce associated developments. I do believe this is an exciting area of work, one where we can make a real difference in the support provided to our professions and provide them with the tools that they need to develop in their respective professions. There is more detail to be given to you, but I'm going to hand over to Michelle, who is actually doing the work for me, to talk to you and provide you with the detailed information of what this work entails and what we want to achieve in both the short and longer term. I'm very grateful to Michelle, and I'll hand over to her now to walk you through the detail. Diolch yn fawr, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sue, and Prynawn da, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity for me just to share the purpose of the clinical supervision arm of the project. But just to reiterate, I work very closely with Ruth Wynne-Williams on the preceptorship arm of this project. Now, clinical supervision isn't new, is it? It's something that we're very much aware of. Reflective practice should be embedded in our practice. So the benefits of supervision are well known, from job satisfaction, staff retention, increased quality of care delivery, which is the most important, delivering safe and effective care, and a better working environment. And I'll share with you just a quote from Tony Butterworth, who you should know if you are familiar with his work from a clinical supervision perspective, which he set out in the early 90s. He says clinical supervision is a formal process of professional support, reflection and learning that contributes to individual development. And there are so many different models of clinical supervision, and I'm sure Amelia and Hannah will share some of their experiences and relate more to those models, specific models of clinical supervision. For example, Proctor's model, which looks at normative, formative and restorative. Restorative supervision is a model in itself, as is the AEQUIP model, modelled by supervisors for midwives. I'm sure Hannah will allude to that. But so what is the purpose of this project? So I'm looking at enabling staff to feel supported and strengthened through clinical supervision in nursing practice. The Cno has just alluded to her vision about developing a nationally consistent approach to clinical supervision and preceptorship. And clinical supervision links very closely to how preceptorship is developed within our nursing curriculum. So we're exploring how that is embedded perhaps in curricula. So that should lead then to an effective preceptorship programme with clinical supervision embedded within that. Preceptorship should be about well-being of our newly registered nurses, rather than perhaps a task-orientated programme. Induction. It's very different to an induction. It's more about well-being and support. And the purpose is to foster and support a kind approach within the nursing workforce by enhancing well-being and supporting networks within healthcare organisations. And this is not just relatable to NHS Wales, but it's also in relation to the independent sector and nurses working in social care areas also. It's about promoting recruitment into the profession whilst improving retention. And if you look at some of the most recent publications in association with clinical supervision and the barriers to implementation of clinical supervision, the narrative is around about improving retention. How can we retain our staff? We know that we are short of almost 2,000 nurses in Wales. Recognise the importance also of continued professional development within a potential model of supervision, and to develop key principles. So an all Wales and All Wales Principles of Clinical Supervision, which I would like to link to the NMC Principles of Preceptorship. They are already developed and embedding within practice. It's also, as I talked to you a bit earlier, about enhancing safe and effective care. So what sort of questions am I asking? Where are we? So we're currently in the discovery phase of the project. Myself and Ruth sort of join as a double act in all of our stakeholder events, and we've had over probably almost 60 interactions with stakeholders across Wales already, but also within England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Ireland we're making contact with. And I want to know, is there currently a safe environment for practitioners to explore clinical supervision? Is there a safe environment to have, you know, those open conversations? Are there any barriers to developing supervision? Also, what are they? What are those enablers and what are those barriers to supervision? Is there a training need to support supervision? You know, there are many modules that have been developed from a professional nurse advocate perspective in England. So I'm looking into how that is structured. There is no clinical supervision education in Wales at the moment. So I'm looking into that as well. So there are so many questions to answer. We're in this discovery phase. We've made links with the Florence Nightingale Foundation. They have a clinical supervision expert reference group, which Amelia sits on actually. So she'll be following me in a second, so she can perhaps share some information around that. But also I've observed practice of midwives. I've observed a group supervision of midwives who very much utilise the A-Equip model of supervision, which is about advocating for education and quality improvement. So it links very much to that restorative approach. So we have a range of evidence already. I'm scoping the literature and I'm scoping best practice, as I said, nationally, UK, and I'm looking into the international agenda as well in relation to clinical supervision. So as a true academic, I have a lot of data that I can pull key themes from. So I've already have a list of key themes from the data that I have. And, you know, it's all about, you know, what is clinical supervision? What does supervision mean to practitioners? Because sometimes it might mean that they're being supervised if they've done something wrong, for example. What is the difference between reflective practice and clinical supervision? Are they the same? So lots of questions coming out from our interaction with our stakeholders. Lots of interaction around whether it should be mandated or not. We've had a few discussions with a number of senior nurses and practitioners around, if it isn't going to be mandated, how will it be prioritised? But how would that mandate look? And I know Sue was asked that question at a recent conference, and it's generated quite a lot of discussion. People were talking about a national network. How can we support supervisors? And the need for training of supervisors has been brought up time and time again. So I'm very keen. I feel privileged to be able to work within the Chief Nursing Officer's team to develop these principles and to develop a framework, but it's going to be based on the voice of our practitioners. That's key. And I want it to be able to be used and utilised effectively. I want it to make a difference to the well-being of our nurses. I'm going to hand over now to Amelia. Thank you. And I'll take questions at the end. I'm sorry for the shortness of the presentation, but I've run out of time. And as you can see, I can talk quite a lot about clinical supervision. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Michelle. So we're going now to hand over to Amelia, who's going to talk about clinical practice, clinical supervision in practice. Thank you, Amelia.
Okay, thanks, Richard, and thanks, Michelle. I think just a couple of things that I was hearing from you straight away, Michelle, about sort of general principles and approaches in Wales. I'm all for consistency there. I would be less keen on advocating a national curriculum in supervision for Wales, because I think the needs are so different. That's like saying everybody needs the same kind of psychotherapy. You know, everybody's needs are different, and in mental health and LD and just different areas, you know, there are different kinds of supervision models that may be required. So I just wanted to say that as part of it. Will, could we go to the next slide, please? Next slide, please, Will. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so my role, you heard a little bit about that from Richard, so I'm not going to dwell on that too much, but just to say really that the best way of growing clinical supervision in the health board was one, to train supervisors within the health board. So obviously that's what we set about doing. Also in running professional supervision groups, and we found that multi-professional groups are really beneficial. So obviously that includes people like nurses from mental health and physical health, and it also includes psychologists and other occupational therapists and a number of professionals that we deal with. And the participants have found that to be very beneficial. So I think that's kind of healthy and holistic in relation to thinking about patient care as well. And other things that I also do in my role is I sort of consult on supervision planning and methodology and principles and that kind of thing. Next slide, please, Will. Okay. So so we just to say a little bit about the training, because you're using a previous version. I've got a later version of the slides. What we've done is the training consists of 15 supervision groups held over a 12-month period, so that participants get an experience of being in a supervision group and giving and receiving supervision under the tutelage of a qualified supervisor. We also, as part of the training, have people give 10 supervision sessions to health board staff, so that they can bring that back and be supported and again tutored in supervision and how to work with the staff in that context and in the safety of a group. In our sort of model, it's quite if you like, a bit of a Rolls-Royce model. It's quite an in-depth model so they learn at least 4 models of supervision, including a person-centered model, the Proctor model, the Hawkins and Shoei model, the Balint approach, and a peer group method as well. So they do that, and then they undertake a couple of assessments, a supervision workbook and a skills assessment, which are according to against criteria that have been advocated by Rothenpilling and other people who've done research into specific generic skills criteria for supervisors. And then they achieve their ABUHB approved supervisor status. So what I would say is we've trained about 150 supervisors in the health board so far in a number of disciplines. I would say about a third to a half of those have been in the nursing profession. And we've assessed and placed around 300 supervisees within the health board, but I'm just a very small part of an organisation that's 16,000 people. So I just deal with, I'm a small corner. There's plenty of other supervision that goes on. I'm located in mental health and LD, but even then a lot of the psychologists do supervision and I don't record that here. So these are things that just come out of my office, if you like. Could we have the next slide, please, Will? So in sort of the critique of the programme so far as I would see it, we train supervisors sustainably. So we give them an in-depth work in those 15 supervision groups over the academic year. And they come out and they're strong supervisors. So I think they're sustainable. I'm not really a believer in a 3-day programme, then leaving people to go out and supervise, and they'll burn out very quickly because of the sorts of things that they're faced with. So I am a believer in an in-depth programme for people. It's great staff development. People often get promoted and move forward because it's great for interpersonal skills, and it trains people very, very well with the interpersonal approaches, which work well in management and in other forms as well. And people then tend to use supervision in an ongoing way, and they also go on to set up their own peer supervision groups. So there is a growing appreciation of clinical supervision in Anara and Bevan now. Next slide, please, Will. Next slide, thank you. So things to note, it's a slow process. There's staff turnover and promotion, so that means that sometimes we train staff, and the underside of that is they get promoted and they move on, and they don't necessarily have time to supervise and continue to supervise staff. Some of them do, some of them don't. Supervision is still ad hoc and not systematic in the health board because it's such a huge employer. And across nursing and so on, it's not made mandatory, and therefore, you know, some people will choose to have it and some people won't. The other thing that I've noticed in particular recently, as the quality of clinical supervision has improved, it kind of shows up the paucity and poor quality of management supervision that often takes place or doesn't take place on the ward. Sorry to be so critical, but I'm assuming that we're in a debating group of people here, so we're sort of mature. It's not about being critical specifically, but broadly speaking, what seems to happen on many of the wards is they don't get sufficient management supervision by a long way, and sometimes managers even want the clinical supervision to sort of fill in that gap, which is not its function. So that's sort of coming out more and more just at the moment. And to be fair, I've given that feedback back to some of the senior nursing managers, and they are looking at that as an issue. I think that's is that the next slide, Will? Let me just check and see if that's not the last slide. So the current thoughts for clinical supervision agenda to move faster. I think, it's good to hear what Sue was talking about earlier, and Michelle. Definitely does require focused investment to get it to the next level. I would say in health boards and so on, it needs a team of people. It needs management and organisational ownership, and both clinical and management supervision need addressing. So I think that may be more widely felt than just in my corner in Anara and Bevan. That may be, my hypothesis is that might well be across the board. Next slide, Will, if there is one. Oh yes, the bigger picture. Yes, that was the other thing that I wanted to say right at the start was, of course, in terms of retention in the nursing profession, sometimes people look to clinical supervision as being the sort of panacea for all ills, which clearly better pay and better working conditions and more staff are absolutely fundamental, in my opinion. And nurses will always struggle in mental health, which is the poor relation of physical health. It's even worse, the situation. Staff are operating in dangerous conditions on mental health wards, and sometimes the safest thing for them to do is actually to leave the profession. And until serious investment is made in staffing and in salaries, that's not going to change. Supervision will help people for a certain amount of time, but it won't tackle that. So let's just be aware of the limitations, as well as also the wonderful things that it will help in terms of enabling a person to develop. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Amelia, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm going to hand over now to Hannah. And again, Anna's going to talk about clinical supervision in her practice. Hannah.
Thank you so much, Richard. Well, hello, my name is Hannah McLoughlin, and I am a clinical supervisor for midwives in Anara and Bevan University Health Board, and I'm here to talk about clinical supervision for midwives. So I suppose the aim of this session is just to provide a brief introduction to clinical supervision for midwives, with a particular emphasis upon the supportive elements of clinical supervision and the application of the restorative resilience supervision principles. So hopefully by the end of the session you should be able to define what clinical supervision is and its encompassing elements, understand the supportive mechanisms incorporated into clinical supervision, and to consider the key skills and work performance zones in the context of practice in accordance with the restorative resilience model. So defining clinical supervision. So clinical supervision is a formal process of ensuring the provision of safe and effective care through the application of quality improvement, risk management and clinical governance, systems of accountability and responsibility, education and restorative resilience supervision. As a result of the 2015 Morecambe Bay report, the role of clinical supervision for midwives became a purely supportive mechanism, with the Nursing and Midwifery Council in direct control of the previous regulatory element of supervision. The clinical supervision for midwives in Wales model was launched in April 2017, which meant that supervision for midwives moved from a statute to mandate requirement. This new employer-led model saw full-time clinical supervisors for midwives, working within health boards, providing dedicated time and support to midwives, increasing their visibility and accessibility to midwives and supporting women's birth choices. Clinical supervision for midwives obviously works in direct alignment with the NMC code, as do we all. So in ABUHB, we have a team of 3 clinical supervisors for approximately 310 midwifery staff, and each one of these individuals has a named clinical supervisor. In accordance with the clinical supervision for Wales midwives model in Wales, it is an employment requirement for midwives to receive a minimum of 4 hours of clinical supervision contact per annum. This can be attained through various means such as one-to-one contacts, meaningful ad hoc contacts in the clinical area and group supervision contacts as well. As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, as with everything, clinical supervision for midwives has adapted to deliver supervisory contact through varying methods to improve accessibility whilst also abiding by government guidance. We continue to use a mixed methods approach in the provision of clinical supervision to ensure continued convenience and inclusivity of midwifery staff. For the purpose of this presentation, I thought it necessary to also consider the perspectives of the staff receiving clinical supervision to determine its meaning, purpose and function. Therefore, midwifery staff of varying banding and experience in ABUHB were asked to anonymously submit their interpretation of the meaning of clinical supervision via the VVox app. So these responses were subsequently compiled into the word cloud that you see, and the quotes taken verbatim from these submissions. So as you can see, an unbiased critique and support to midwives that ensure all care is linked directly to clinical governance, and providing support to the workforce through reflection and guidance, listening, restorative supervision to help build resilience, improving the well-being of staff, a go-to person who you know is on your side, no judgment, a safe space to discuss worries and concerns, and support, being able to discuss any worries, helping it improve own practice by reflecting, encouragement, guidance, and someone willing to listen. So obviously from these quotes, you can see there is a particular emphasis and value given to the supportive elements of clinical supervision by midwife staff. So I thought I'd include a few of the supportive roles that we do have as clinical supervisors. Obviously there are more and I can think of them now, but these are the ones I thought of off the top of my head. So the promotion of learning and reflective practice during group supervision. And there's a particular emphasis given to critical moments in a midwife's career. So with career advice or changes, bereavement, maternity leave, long-term sickness, career breaks and secondments. We're in an excellent position to offer facilitation of debrief discussions and reflective discussions, and completion of PADRs and revalidation confirmations, and support of midwifery staff undertaking capability programmes and action learning sets, support of preceptorship midwives undertaking the Once for Wales preceptorship programme, support for midwives undertaking the practical aspects of the newborn and infant examination training, and obviously support to midwifery staff involved in putting things right, fitness to practice and other investigative processes. So obviously negative effects on morale, retention and wellbeing are observed for healthcare professionals experiencing workplace adversity. This is particularly relevant given the recent adversities posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, the ability to foster resilience in the individual healthcare professional is vital. The restorative resilience model of supervision was developed by Wallbank following research into the emotional impact of neonatal and infant loss on the psychological states of healthcare professionals. This model of supervision was conceptualised to support professionals to process their workplace experiences and to support them in the development of resilience and supervision coping mechanisms. In an experimental study, it was noted that increased job satisfaction, compassionate care and collaborative working were observed as a result of the intervention of restorative resilience supervision, as well as reduced sickness rates and inappropriate workplace behaviours. Restorative resilience supervision provides a holistic approach to clinical supervision by drawing upon the principles of the psychological systems, which are the threat system, drive system and the affiliative system. However, Wallbank further elaborated upon this and proposed the work performance zones, referring to the cognitive and psychological state of the individual in relation to their work performance. The restorative resilience supervision model draws upon 6 key elements, which are emotional containment, reflective practice, stress inoculation, resilience training, action learning and foundation coaching. I believe the elements of this model are transferable to alternative healthcare leadership contexts and are not exclusive to clinical supervision. When to use these individual skills is dependent upon the individual's work performance zones, which we'll touch on now, finally. So an individual that is experiencing a high level of stress may find themselves within the no zone. This individual may be disruptive, withdrawn or uncooperative as a means of coping with their current situation, and the productivity in this zone is usually observed to be low. Individuals within the Y zone are usually observed to be anxious and questioning, although this questioning is not to aid in their individual learning, but as a result of the anxiety that they are experiencing. So individuals may be within the Y zone due to exposure to adverse workplace events or conflicts. Productivity may also be low in this zone due to a reduced cognitive capacity as a result of the event. The No and Y zones require emotional containment, active listening and reflection from the supervisor to foster resilience and psychological empowerment for the affected individual. Action learning sets and resilience training may ensure that individuals that have successfully exited these zones do not return to them without sufficient coping strategies. The I zone then indicates an individual who is motivated to continue their professional development and has an awareness of their own contribution and actions. This zone works to increase productivity. And finally, an individual within the We zone considers improvement initiatives to benefit themselves as well as their colleagues, the service user and the wider organisation. In the I and We zones, foundation coaching and action learning is useful to aid individual self-efficacy, development and to identify threats to their own efficiency. And that's me, so I thought I'd just finish with a quote. So we all move forward when we recognise how resilient and striking the women or men around us are. And thank you for listening.
Anna, thank you so much for that. I just want to thank all the panel for your presentations. I think there are just 4 things that I think that there's a thread through everything that you've said. The first thing is kindness. Second one is safety. Third for me is good practice. And the 4th one, which is so important, is about organisation ownership of this. So we're now going to hand over to Nicola Davis-Job, who's our acute care and leadership advisor, to facilitate the question and answer session. So over to you, Nicola.
Thank you, Richard. That was Thank you, Richard. I was stuck on mute then for just a second. Yeah, the 4 things that you explained and the threads are really important. And I was reflecting back to our second session with Brendan McCormack then on healthful culture, and healthful culture really resounded in what Hannah said about the restorative process. So that's enough about me talking, and I'm going to go straight now to the questions. So the first question then, thanks very much to all the speakers for a really informative presentation. Please could I ask, how are nurses in the front line feeding into your work on clinical supervision? And I think that's maybe for Michelle and maybe for Amelia. So should we go Michelle first?
Yeah, as I said, it's really important to have the voice of nurses. So we are planning 3 stakeholder events in July. We'll be publishing the dates of those shortly. So they'll be live events. So we'll have, it's like a workshop looking at preceptorship and clinical supervision, actually. We also have spoken already to some frontline practitioners. So that is all factored and documented within our data. Yeah, so we're including service, our service users in this are our nurses, aren't they? And our nursing teams. So they very much will be listened to and will factor, their thoughts will be factored into any development of any frameworks or principles that we will develop.
And Amelia, what have you found about the frontline supervision? And I guess sustaining it. You did mention a bit, didn't you, about the turnover of staff and staff getting promoted. But I guess, do they struggle because they're so busy, I suppose?
I think a couple of things. Well, I mean, those who they contribute in and experience in a couple of ways. One is they participate in the training programs and they find that to be of great benefit, both developmentally to their personal and professional development. So they really enjoy the training. In terms of receiving the supervision too, I place them on a one-to-one basis. We've got a couple of different models running. So sometimes they're placed with supervisors and sometimes we have a sort of ward-based, almost supervision surgery type model. And they access, a supervisor goes to a ward for a day a month and they into a private room and the nurses go and access it there. So there's 2 different ways of a number of different ways, because we do online as well, but anyways, a number of different ways that people can access supervision to nurses on the front line, and we do that. I think where they sometimes struggle is if they don't get it on the ward, and sometimes people don't want to go to supervision on the ward anyway, and why should they really? They're kind of preoccupied with their work at the time, and might prefer to do it online outside of ward time, but not necessarily work time. So at the moment we're trying to get a sort of a clearer message from the organisation about it is okay for the nurse, say, to have supervision once a month and claim online and claim back those hours by negotiation with their manager, so that, say, for example, after 7 months of regular one-to-one online supervision, that they can then claim that time back as a day off or whatever that might be. So that's sort of, those areas can get a bit tricky because sometimes ward managers turn around and say, no, you can't have it. And even on the ward-based surgery model, they might still stop them going, even though they're right on the ward and ready for it, due to busyness or other factors. And it can sometimes get sabotaged by both peers and managers due to the pressures of the work.
That takes us nicely to the next question, where they ask, I know it was touched on during the presentations, how can clinical supervision be implemented in practice? It's the first thing to be dropped when we're busy. So again, the busyness, but then they say, should it be mandated? I'm going to go to Hannah for this. Should it be mandated? Because you mentioned that it now is for you guys in midwifery, isn't it?
Yeah, so as a result of the 2017 model being released following the Morecambe Bay, it was made a mandatory requirement for midwives to have 4 hours of supervision. So we do try to maintain that, and I think, Amelia touched on it through various means. Some people don't like to have that group situation, they don't find it conducive to their learning. So it's making sure that we are we offer as many opportunities for staff to get these supervisory hours. So whether it is one-to-one contacts, whether it is ad hoc contacts in the clinical area, or whether it is group supervision. And obviously we try to maintain then obviously different ways of delivering this. So we do virtual group supervisions, we'll meet with individuals over Teams, and obviously we'll meet with them one-to-one, you know, face-to-face, as long as they're happy to do that. And I think, you know, I think staff really do benefit from it. I think, I don't want to, you know, toot my own horn, but I think, you know, having been on the receiving end of clinical supervision, it is just that go-to person who, you know, will be non-judgmental and who will support you with whatever you have, be it, you know, something positive or, you know, something not so positive. So I do believe it's mandated, but I suppose I can't remember a time where it wasn't for us, which is the difficulty, I think.
Just quickly then, Amelia and Michelle, what do you think? Should it be mandated?
Yeah. But they've got to have the time, and it's got to be fully supported from the top down. So absolutely, of course, it should be mandated on a monthly basis, you know, is my view. Hannah, when you said 4 hours, is that 4 hours a year?
Yep, so that's 4 hours a year.
Yeah.
So
I think they should have 12 hours a year. So let's go for this.
Yeah. Michelle.
Listening to everybody's opinions, the majority of people I've talked to have said it should be mandated. How it could be mandated, when you look at infrastructure and the workforce as it is at the moment, I think more importantly, it needs to be embedded. And if it could be embedded and there a change in culture in relation to clinical supervision, that might be a step forward in the first instance. But how do we get that embedded? Our midwifery colleagues embed it in their curriculum. It's built into their preceptorship, and then it's now embedded in their day-to-day practice. So if we could do that, would we need to mandate it? Health visitors have safeguarding supervision. It's not mandated, it's expected, and it's embedded into their practice, and it's the norm within their practice. And they access group supervision or one-to-one supervision. So there's almost like a you know, a variety of options for them based on their need. So for me, the jury is out there at the moment. I wouldn't like to say it should be mandated, because I don't know how we would mandate it and how that mandation would be supported. We've had conversations about organisations. Should they be mandated to deliver it rather than the practitioner? You know, the mandation linked to the practitioner. So I would say the jury's out there for me at the moment, but I don't know whether Sue would like to come in on this.
Yes, sure. I have a view, as you all know. So I guess I would start by saying, you know, to mandate or not to mandate, I think is I'd like to be informed by the evidence. That's the first thing. 4 hours or 12 hours. So tell me why. Why do you say 12 hours? How does that actually support? And where's the robust evidence that shows me that 12 hours improves well-being as opposed to 4 hours? And I'm willing to listen. I also think there's an absence of a mandate around clinical supervision. This is not whether it's mandated or not, but a mandate that sets out expectations and standards for clinical supervision, and then who delivers on that? Where are the accountability frameworks for an organization around that? So I think there are a couple of things that need to come into play here. The other thing I said at my conference when I was asked about mandation is I said it is really important before we think about mandating something that the conditions need to be correct. The conditions need to exist to allow something to flourish. So if I expect and I want, as a professional and your head of professions, I want clinical supervision to flourish because it's good for the well-being, it's good for practice, it's good for patients, it's good for workforce, then I need to put the conditions into place. Those conditions being, I think Michelle mentioned it and Amelia mentioned it, from a safety, workforce, from recruitment and retention, there are conditions that need to be met in order to then mandate. Then we're on a high road to success, I believe. Otherwise, I'm mandating something, I'm giving you an expectation without the reality of delivery, which I think is not exactly right. Now, if you're to use that as a lever to set the conditions, then that's a different discussion. But I'm really open to have that discussion. It's what comes first really in this. And I think we will be led by you in the workforce. You will tell Michelle and Ruth as they do their work, and we will be led from that, draw on the evidence, and then come to a determination, Nicola.
Fantastic. And I can see all the benefits that everyone's talked about. So if we have less nurses in a workforce who are healthier and have more well-being, then it's got to be a winner for everybody.
Well, can I just add something there?
Yeah,
Michelle
sure.
or Nicola, or did you want to go on to the next question?
No, we've got time.
Okay.
We've got time.
I mean, just a couple of things. Yeah, it's reflective practice as well. It enhances your ability and your capability to reflect on your work experience. So it actually improves people's skills at work. So there's that developmental aspect, which is, sort of super important really to sophisticated nursing in that sense. And the other thing is, just to respond to Sue a little bit, I mean, it's a bit like disability legislation or something, it's a bit of a vicious circle, until you bring the legislation in, people ain't going to do nothing about it. If we say, well, we won't bring it in till we're ready, we'll never be ready, sort of thing. So I think, there's some evidence, isn't there, sort of to indicate that certain sort of legal requirements around equal opportunity, you've got to stick the legal thing in first, and then people's attitudes sort of follow. But I'll leave it there anyway, sort of.
It is right. It's that's like chicken and egg, though, isn't it? You've got to have it ready so it flourishes, and you've got to have it mandated so it happens. There's a long message for you guys from Tracy McKelvey that I'll read out. And she says, this is more of an observation, really. Great presentations. It's right that clinical supervision should be about sharing best practice, learning and development in a safe and supportive environment. Sadly, however, there are so many nurses that, in my role as manager, I've come across who've never engaged in clinical supervision, despite having been nursing for many years. It's either not understood, resulting in a lack of engagement, or not, I guess she says, not encouraged by employers. And this was also noticed among other health disciplines, i.e. physio. Having clinical supervision embedded from student nurse training phase is vital to ensure that our future nurses undertake this practice as a standard. And this, of course, surely links with our revalidation. So that's a really good point as well in terms of revalidation. And what do we think then? Because she's kind of saying what Sue and Michelle and Amelia and I and Hannah said, but what are the links then with reflective practice and restorative practice and with revalidation? Who'd like to go first?
Can I answer that briefly? I just think that it needs to be embedded, as Tracy's alluded to, into the nursing curriculum. And I'm not sure whether it's as embedded as it should be. I think it's really important. The NMC have written to all of the HEIs and emphasise the importance of reflective practice and clinical supervision. The Point of Care Foundation, QNI Scotland, Foundation of Nursing Studies have just done a joint statement around reflective practice. It's very much on the agenda at the moment, isn't it? But it needs to be embedded in our curriculums, as it is in midwifery, as it is in psychology, as it is in physiotherapy. It needs to be embedded, and then it becomes the norm, and it becomes part of our everyday culture for our practitioners to access and feel supported, which isn't happening at the moment. So I think that's a starting point, and hopefully this project will feed into a national framework to go forward.
Thank you, Michelle. Anybody else on the panel?
The only thing I would add to that, Nicholas, I completely agree with Michelle. The vision when we started the work around clinical supervision and preceptorship, there's a reason we've done this as a dual piece of work at the same time to parallel each other, is because I truly believe, and my academics, Michelle and both Ruth will advise better, but I truly believe that clinical supervision doesn't start once you're qualified and you're in practice. It starts right at upstream when you're a student nurse, and we've had these conversations. So I've been speaking to student nurses and asking, what does reflective practice mean to them? I've met quite a number of student nurses actually. So it does happen. They do it. Then they do it as a piece of academic work, though. It's part of the studies. It's not seen as a thing like Amelia describes it, in order of development and being better at what you do and really honing those skills for clinical practice. And that's where we've got to change, then reframe it. So for me, the vision is clearly that the work that Michelle and Ruth will produce will inform, influence and make real change for the future nurse leaders, the future nurses that are coming out through the programs, because it has to be. Otherwise, I think we're just doing more of the same, and we're not going to get, we'll be sitting here in 10 years time having the same discussion, which is just not what I'm signing up to.
Thank you. Hannah, Amelia?
I'll come in. So obviously you're going on about the embedding, which is so important, isn't it? And I think within midwifery, we are in a very, very lucky place that, you know, supervision is recognised as something that is very important, as well as, you know, reflective practice. And I think it is embedded in university, isn't it? When the pre-registration, the midwives are coming through and they're exposed to that supervision. We go and speak to the student midwives. They're exposed to us in the clinical area, and we try and introduce ourselves and what we are doing. So, you know, once those midwives are in the clinical area as qualified practitioners, you know, it isn't that kind of not knowing who we are and being quite daunting, really. You know, when they see us in our blue uniforms, you know, we're relatable and they know that we are there from pre-registration all the way up to when they're fully qualified. And I think we have a lot to do with the new, I know I alluded to it in my presentation, the Once for Wales preceptorship programme, which is an all Wales programme for the preceptors, and we have a lot to do with supporting the preceptors through that programme, and going from a band 5 newly qualified midwife to a band 6, hopefully then after a minimum of 12 months. Sorry, Amelia, I don't know whether you want to come in on that.
Yeah,
as well.
no, that's fine. I think what I'd just make a broad statement and say that those who, you know, there's a sort of virtuous circle in one sense, but a vicious in another way. You've got those who are skilled and want to be more skilled tend to present for supervision, want supervision, train in supervision, and they won't get into the groove and go. And then, of course, those who, you know, who are sort of struggle more and, you know, could really benefit if it's not there as a sort of something that they can just step up and access really easily. So diversity of models and getting at it in different ways, as Hannah's described, and also, you know, is super important, really, so they can take it off the shelf in different sorts of ways. Yeah.
Thank you, Amelia. That answered the question, the last question that we have, and we're running out of time now for questions. So I'd like the panel, if they're willing, if we could send the questions to you after the event, and we can post the most frequently asked questions. Now it's my great pleasure to hand over to Lynn Middleton, who's our PNC lead and Senior Executive Nursing in Iron Bevan. Just to sum up and to thank the panel again on all our behalf. You've been amazing today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Nicola. Well, it's been a pleasure this afternoon to listen to the debate, and as Nicola said, it could go on for a lot longer. Just a few key things that I would just like to reflect upon from this afternoon, if I might. We had a definition that Hannah provided to us, and I think having some kind of firm grounding is always good as a starting point. And she told us that it's a formal process to ensure the provision of safe and effective care. And then she went on to tell us some of the elements that support that, and that led me back to one of our previous speakers that Nicola had alluded to during this set of 4 leadership sessions, and talking about we always prioritise the absolute best care that we can for patients, but we don't always prioritise the best possible support that we can give to our colleagues. And I guess this is exactly where clinical supervision is placed, that wonderful support that we need to be able to provide. And the compassionate leadership, I think one of our speakers talked about the support for the supervisors. So it's not just about the provision of the supervision to nurses and midwives generally across Wales, but how do we then support those that are taking that role of supervisor? Michelle told us about we have a UK-wide approach to reflection through revalidation, and we've touched on that a little bit in the questions and answers. But Michelle went on to tell us about how they want to build on that. So CNO and Michelle's way forward here is to have a framework in Wales that with key principles that would be linked to the preceptorship work, so that we get a seamless support from student, nurse and midwife in going forward through to qualified nurse and throughout a whole career span. We had the question about one size doesn't fit all, so we have to be flexible. We talked about should it be mandated, shouldn't it be mandated? It looks as if Michelle's got a lot of work ahead of her in terms of nailing down some of these key concepts. But I think just what I want to end on in terms of my reflection is that word art that Hannah put up, and some of those keywords that people had come back with: listening, reflecting, well-being, support, knowledge, education, resilience, care and space. Really, really important elements of clinical supervision. And being kind, as Richard said, to ourselves and to others, and ensuring that there is ownership support. So it's a really exciting time in Wales to be a nurse or a midwife, with the plans for clinical supervision to be explored and then implemented. And as Sue has said to us a little earlier, that ambition for clinical supervision to flourish is absolutely key. I'd like to thank Sue, Michelle, Amelia and Hannah. What a wonderful afternoon we've had. I also want to say a massive thank you to all of you. I think there were 82 of you that joined us today for this session. It's been absolutely amazing. And if you have missed it or you want to go back and look at some of the previous ones, then it is on YouTube, on the RCN YouTube channel, and you would be able to go back and listen. We've had a wonderful end to this series of 4 sessions, but before you go, just a quick shout out for the RCN Nurse of the World, Nurse of the Year, Nurse of the World, it is Nurse of the World, but Nurse of the Year 2022 award. Don't forget to nominate your amazing colleagues. We've got incredible talent in Wales. Let's recognise it and showcase it. That's absolutely our prime aim now going forward in 2022. There'll be information about that posted in the chat bar for you. We've also got another leadership session, and that's on the 12th of July, and the topic is psychological safety. So I'd like to invite anybody that would like to join us for that. Again, we'll post a link in the sidebar for you to see. And finally, can I just encourage you to fill in the survey around today's session that will be available in the sidebar. And it's only by learning what you particularly enjoyed and benefited from in the sessions that we can, improve for future sessions as we go forward. So on behalf of all of the RCN team, on behalf of today's speakers, a massive thank you to everybody. It's been an incredible 4 weeks, and I'd like to say thank you and goodbye to you all.